Good morning, everyone. Today is June 10th, 2019, and here's today's Monday Morning Minute. Just so you know, I'll post a video like this every week. It'll be up by noon every Monday, and I just ask that you carve out a few minutes in your day to make sure that you check it out and that you ask any questions that you might have. So for today, I'll briefly go over the syllabus. I'll also talk about some general course navigation notes. I'll introduce this week's readings, and we'll end talking about this week's assignments. So here on our Canvas page, you can access the course syllabus simply by clicking the syllabus tab over here. It should come up in a preview like so. You can also download it here. Here's our course description and our objectives, and I've talked about these a bit in our welcome video, but they're here also for your reference. Here's our required texts, including the Women in Culture textbook, from which most of our readings will come. And I also have a few electronic readings that are available on Canvas that you'll be reading every week. So this is an ACE 9 course. We'll be focusing a lot on this particular strain of the ACE requirements in our final assignment, the gender infographic, but more on that when we get a bit closer. Here are our major assignments. The first is a What is Feminism reflection that's actually due Tuesday. So tomorrow, June 11th. And I'm asking you to record an introduction of yourself, as well as your definition of feminism, as well as any other experiences you want to share that maybe have led you to that particular definition. We'll revisit these definitions at the end of the course, and you'll have a chance to revise this definition, to expand it, etc. Also, every week you'll be participating in a reading response discussion in a small group. And so these reading responses should be 400 to 500 words that synthesize all of the readings that we've done over the course of that week. I'm asking you to specifically call out at least 3 course readings and to cite them. But the idea is that you'll be weaving in all of the themes, the concepts, the theories that we're exploring, and really trying to synthesize them, to bring them together. So you'll post that most of the time on Thursdays. And then between Thursday and Sunday of every given week, I'm going to ask you to go back into your small group discussion, read through other people's responses, and contribute at least 2 follow-up responses to your colleagues. We'll also be doing reading journal checks, so I imagine these as either a Google Doc or a simple word processing document, and I'll just ask that you have an entry for every reading that was assigned that week every time you turn it in. It can be something very, very simple, like this template I provided, where you just note the week number, the title of the piece, the author, and then your own notes. So I'm looking for less than 100 words here. It can be a question or a set of questions that you have about a text. It can be connections that you're drawing between texts. It can be a brief summary, if that's helpful. The idea is that these reading journals, this kind of like constant log of what you've read, can be really helpful as you develop your reading responses, which are 400 to 500 words, a bit more in depth. I'll talk more about our major projects as they come up, but just to highlight our first one really quickly, it's a multimodal interview project, and I'm asking you to interview someone from another generation. So in most cases, this will probably be someone older than us. And it should be somebody from a gender minority group, which I've defined here in the syllabus. It's also defined in the assignments page. And you'll ask them about their experiences with gender and also their thoughts about feminism. And you'll draw some connections between their experiences and what we've read in our course. So I just wanted to kind of draw your attention to that because you do have to find somebody else, and that might take a little bit of coordination. This is due the end of week 2. Our second major project is a gender narrative, where you'll describe your own personal experiences with gender and or sexuality. Again, more on that to come. And our final assignment is a gender infographic, where we're zooming out and thinking about an international issue related to gender. Here's our grading scale. If you have any questions, of course, let me know. I think it's pretty standard. You'll be creating and sharing videos in this class, starting with the What is Feminism video that is due Tuesday. Here are some potential video sharing software that you can use. So VidGrid is available to all UNL students. It's pretty easy to use. Screencast-O-Matic, which is what I'm using right now, is pretty great as well. I've also included some screen captures here which I hope will help you access either VidGrid or whichever software you're using. And also, I've included step-by-step instructions to embed your videos. I prefer that you embed videos. That way it's easy for us. This is the kind of the final product, just to click and start watching whatever video you have rather than having to download it, since that can take a lot of space on our computers. So there are instructions there to embed your video. Here are some course expectations, one including this Monday Morning Minute, which will happen every week. Remember to ask 3 before me, so consult all of the available resources that you have before asking me a technical question. But certainly, if no one seems to have the answer, please feel free to talk to me. And then, of course, let's relate to each other respectfully, especially because we'll be talking about a lot of difficult issues in some cases, a lot of personal issues in some cases as well. So let's remember to maintain a safe space, knowing that a safe space is not always a comfortable space. Late work is highly discouraged, as it says here. In most cases, I have rubrics for our assignments, and most of those rubrics include a timeliness requirement. So if you don't turn in something on time, your grade will suffer within that timeliness portion of the rubric. So here's the reading response rubric. It's also within the assignments page if you care to look. And here's our course schedule. I've tried to break it down so that it's more or less legible. I have it sorted out by week, and then I have our subtopics in yellow and the readings below in each column that I'm asking us to do that relate to that subtopic. And then the far right column, those are all of our assignments and our due dates. And I think this is pretty standard. Again, if you have questions, let me know. Some really brief course navigation. So I'll post announcements here at the announcements tab. You can also use modules if you'd like. Here I've included not only links to all of the electronic resources that are required for you to read that are not part of our Women in Culture textbook, but I've also included just text headers of all of the articles that we're supposed to be reading from our Women in Culture textbook. It's just denoted WIC. And this is just a way for you to keep track of everything that's due. So you can open up week 1, for instance. You can see all that you're supposed to read. Please do read it. I think these are really great pieces. And then indented, these are all of the assignments. I include also at the bottom just some helpful resources that I think are useful and relevant to that particular week. So for instance, starting off, if you have questions about the discussion board and how it works, please feel free to check that out. And so each week you can just come to the modules. You can see again everything that you're responsible for reading and all of the assignments for that particular week. All right. So this week's readings, we'll start with just a few introductory pieces, starting with everything you wanted to know about feminism. This is a pretty brief article from Everyday Feminism that talks about the many different types of feminism that exist. It's not all kind of one sort of feminism. And I would also like you to read the few pages of the introduction to Bad Feminist, which is a collection of essays from Roxane Gay, who was on UNL's campus actually last fall, which is pretty great. This is, again, just a few pages, just the introduction. She defines why she calls herself a bad feminist, and I think a lot of us might relate to her formulation of this concept. We'll then this week move to the first wave of feminism, in which the overarching goal was women's suffrage, the right to vote. So this time frame took place roughly between the middle of the 1800s through the early 1900s. And certainly kind of a cornerstone of first wave feminism is the Seneca Falls Declaration, which was drafted in Seneca Falls, New York, by a group of white suffragists such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Lucretia Mott. And so if you haven't read it, and even if you have, this is, of course, a required reading for this week. But I think it's really interesting, even if you already have read it, maybe back in high school, just to see this kind of detailed list of demands that these women put together. And you'll notice, of course, things that have been achieved, things that maybe you can say, oh yeah, I think we've gotten there. And of course, other things that maybe we fall short on even in 2019. And so that second piece, The Meaning of Seneca Falls, was written in 1998, 150 years after the Seneca Falls Declaration. And it's reflecting on this question of how far have we come? How much farther have we to go in terms of equality? And so the last two pieces are a kind of a critical reflection, I suppose, on Seneca Falls, starting with Sojourner Truth's piece, Ain't I a Woman? So she, as a Black woman, is writing about the double/triple standard that she is held to. Like, she is not included in these discussions about suffrage that the women who drafted the Seneca Falls Declaration, were writing about and demanding. She's saying, "Ain't I a woman? Right? Shouldn't I be considered part of this?" And in fact, Ta-Nehisi Coates writes a piece in The Atlantic that we're reading called The Great Schism, in which he draws out very clearly the ways in which white feminists, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, actually hedged their bets against people of color. They actually allied themselves with white supremacists at the expense of people of color and suffrage for them. So this is a piece that we don't often talk about when we think about first wave feminism, but it's a really critical piece to understand. Then moving on to the second wave of feminism. So women have the right to vote, and yet the world is not the beautiful and equitable place that we want it to be. There's still a long way to go. So the second wave of feminism we can think of, as any time after the 1920s, but really kind of cresting in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And the focus here was on systemic sexism, the ways in which our institutions further and reproduce sexist systems and ways of being and relating. So to go through these really quickly, we'll read a piece from Betty Friedan's book, The Problem That Has No Name. We'll then move on to talking about Audre Lorde's piece, which is a classic, and this is Audre Lorde, by the way. This is Betty Friedan. So Audre Lorde wrote Age, Race, Class, and Sex. She's kind of setting us up for next week when we talk about intersectionality, as she calls attention to the ways in which we can't just think about gender alone. We have to talk about gender in relationship to our racial identities, to our age, to our socioeconomic class status. We'll also read from Alice Walker, this piece, Womanist. This is Alice Walker here. And she is very intentionally carving a space that is separate from white feminism, because white feminism, as it did in the first wave and as it continued to do in the second wave, systemically excluded women of color. So Walker thinks, instead of calling myself a feminist, which has such close ties to white feminism, I'm going to call myself a womanist, which for her kind of is predicated upon the idea of being a woman of color. So there's more to it than that, of course, but she kind of outlines her definition here. We'll read from Marilyn Frye. She tries to define oppression. She gives a really powerful structuralist metaphor and then describes why oppression is the right term to use when we're talking about gender inequity. Pieces 5 and 6, When You Meet a Lesbian and Heterosexuality Questionnaire, are both kind of tongue-in-cheek. They're both sort of like inverting the question. Especially this 6th piece here, this Heterosexuality Questionnaire, it's kind of skewering the fact that mostly heterosexual people do not have to defend their heterosexuality. People do not interrogate them about their heterosexuality or ask, "Are you sure? Have you tried anything?" Blah, 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 like really kind of invasive questions. And instead they're inverting that fact in a really interesting way, I think. We'll read from Gloria Steinem. She's up here. And her piece is called If Men Could Menstruate. And I want to say up front that this entire premise of her piece is excluding trans folks, because we know, of course, there are some trans people who identify as men and menstruate. So this idea of if this could happen is kind of moot, because it does happen. This was written in 1978, kind of the height of the second wave feminist movement. And I felt it was important for everyone to read some Gloria Steinem. She's a major figure when we think about second wave feminism. But please do know that this does exclude lots of people in the population. And yet I still think that there'll be some good stuff for us to talk about. And then finally, we have a brief video link called Second Wave Feminism Without White Women. You can access that on Canvas. And then wrapping up real quick, this week's assignments. We have our What is Feminism Part 1 discussion. That's the video reflection that you'll submit. That's due Tuesday. We have our first reading response. Put your initial post up by Thursday, 2 follow-ups by Sunday. And we have our very first reading journal check, which will be due on Sunday. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.